Buenos días. Maria, muchas gracias for such a lovely introduction. But I want to tell you about the very first time that I was introduced to speak about Leonardo da Vinci. It was back in the early 1990s, and I was speaking for a business group called the Young Presidents Organization. They're presidents of companies. They're under age 50, that's why they call them young. And there's 8,000 members of the Young Presidents Organization around the world, including a Mexico City chapter. If you added up the revenue of all of their businesses, it would be the fourth largest GNP, gross national product, in the world. So it's a very powerful business group, very successful entrepreneurs. Anyway, I was speaking to them about creativity and innovation. This was in Washington, D.C. And I like Washington, D.C., but I knew that they were holding one of their premier events in Florence, Italy, which is my favorite city. And I really wanted to get invited. So I imagined that somebody might approach me and ask me what I would do if they would invite me to Florence. And I figured they might want something really special because I imagined lots of people wanted to go to Florence. It's a very beautiful city. Did you ever have anything happen in your life where you picture something in your mind and it happens just as you pictured it? I finished my talk to the presidents in Washington, D.C. on creativity and innovation, and a gentleman approached me and he said, "I am the education chairman for Florence." He said, "If we were to invite you, what would you do?" He said, "We want something really special because everybody wants to go to Florence." Well, I looked him right in the eye and I said, "How about how to think like Leonardo da Vinci?" And he said, "Can you really do that?" And I said, "Sure." This is the mind of an entrepreneur. I had 6 months to make it up. But I wasn't making it up just out of the sky, because Leonardo da Vinci was my childhood hero, along with Superman. And I remember when I discovered that Superman was just a comic book character. But Leonardo da Vinci was real, and he seemed to embody all of our human potential. So this was perfect. It was my opportunity to immerse myself in this passion. I went to the place where Leonardo da Vinci was born, and I went to the place where he died. I literally walked in his footsteps and aimed to look at the world from his point of view. I read his notebooks over and over again. I interviewed the great Leonardo da Vinci scholars of the world. I went to the museums where I could witness his work, and I meditated, contemplated on his work. I started dreaming about him. And from those dreams, 7 principles emerged. Now, people say to me, "Did you come up with the number 7 because it's a good number for marketing?" But the truth is, I tried to find an 8th principle. There wasn't one. I tried to consolidate down to 6. No way. There are 7 principles for thinking like Leonardo da Vinci, irreducible and complete. So that summer, I wrote a paper about the 7 principles. And of course, I sent in my biography so that the committee in Florence could have someone introduce me. So I sent the 7 principles paper and the biography. But the person introducing me confused the 2 documents, leading to the most memorable introduction I have ever received. It went like this: "Ladies and gentlemen, members and guests, Here at the Young Presidents Organization, we have had many esteemed guests, but never have I had the privilege and the pleasure to introduce someone with a resume like this. Anatomist, architect, botanist, city planner, designer, engineer, painter, sculptor. Ladies and gentlemen, Michael Gelb. Dr. Glenn Doman at the Institute for the Achievement of Human Potential in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, USA. Dr. Doman is one of the world leaders in helping children with brain damage recover their function. You know about the idea of neuroplasticity? That your brain is flexible, adaptable, it can change and grow. You can go on developing it and improving it throughout your life. And even in cases of severe brain damage, it may be possible to recruit other areas of the brain to recover function. Well, Doman understood this 40 years ago, long before science validated the idea of neuroplasticity. And he and his colleagues worked with children and their families who had a severe diagnosis of brain damage. He tells the story of one boy he worked with. The prognosis was not good. They said he would never function normally. He would certainly never learn how to read. Doman and his team worked with the boy and his family for about 1.5 years. And after 1.5 years, he was functioning pretty well. He learned how to read. He was actually reading 2 years above his grade level in school. People stepped back and said, wait a minute. If a so-called brain-damaged child is capable of reading 2 years above their grade level in school, what are normal children capable of? Doman wrote that every child is born with the genius capacity of a Leonardo da Vinci. But, he added, we go about de-geniusing them. So this morning is a re-geniusing session. Are you ready? Good. The first principle for thinking like Leonardo, I'm going to teach you some Italian. Maria's helping me with my Spanish. I'll teach you some Italian. You'll see that the Italian sounds a lot like the Spanish, so it won't be hard to make the translation between Italian and Spanish. But we're going to say it in Italian with big Italian gestures. So the first principle in Italian is curiosità. So in Spanish it'll probably be curiosidad. But let's say it in Italian, curiosità. Everybody say it all together with big gestures, all together. Curiosità. I need bigger gestures, all together. Curiosità. Molto bene, grazie. So, curiosità, curiosidad, in English, curiosity. The first principle for thinking like Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo da Vinci was probably the most curious person who ever lived. What was he curious about? Everything. He wanted to know truth. He wanted to know beauty. He wanted to know goodness. Ultimately, he wanted to know the mind of God. Everything else was just details. His curiosità took him up into the sky. You know about his plans for a flying machine, a helicopter, and maybe his most amazing invention of all, the parachute. Leonardo da Vinci invented the parachute before anybody could fly. That's thinking ahead. His curiosità took him underneath the oceans. You know about his plans for a submarine, for a diving bell, the snorkel. First appear in the notebooks of Leonardo da Vinci, along with the extendable ladder that fire departments still use today, the ball bearing, the 3-speed gear shift, and the concept of automation all first appear in the notebooks of Leonardo da Vinci. So what can you do to have a renaissance of your own curiosità? Well, one thing you can do is to do just what Leonardo did. Keep a notebook or a journal. How many people already keep a notebook or a journal? A few of us. Good, good, good. How many people have to do serious writing for your school? Right? So you're writing for school, you have to take an exam, it has to be logical, it has to have a beginning, middle, and end, and you get judged on how good it is. It doesn't get any easier when you go into the workforce. You will always have to be able to do this. It's very, very important to be logical, linear, to think in the box. You have to be very good at it. Before you can be creative, you have to be logical and linear. You have to do it really well. Serious consequences in this world if you don't. The danger is you get so stuck in doing that, you lose the art of creativity. You lose the art of imagination. But keeping a notebook is one of the great secrets for keeping your imagination alive. Because those of you who already keep your own notebook or journal, you know nobody else has to see it. It doesn't have to be logical. You can skip around from one subject to another. It's just a way of stimulating your own imagination. And we can look at a page from Leonardo's notebook. And what we see in Leonardo's notebooks, he skips around from one subject to another. He has notes on the flight of a bird or the refraction of light. And then on the same page, he writes down his favorite joke that he heard that day. And he writes down a shopping list. And then he writes down definitions of vocabulary words. Scholars criticized him. They said, your notebooks, they don't have a table of contents. They're not organized. Right, because Leonardo da Vinci's mind was completely free to move from one subject to another. Now, I especially it's fascinating to study Leonardo, maybe the greatest genius ever. But wouldn't you be especially interested if there was something throughout history that just about every great genius did? Wouldn't that be especially interesting? If Leonardo does it, yes. But what if Thomas Edison does it too? And what if Marie Curie does it? What if they all, and Charles Darwin, all these great minds, what if they all do the same thing? You know what that same thing is? They all kept notebooks and journals with lots of creative doodling, with skipping around from one subject to another. Thomas Edison's notebooks and his creative doodles became 1,093 individual United States patents. Leonardo's doodles became drawings and paintings in the great art museums of the world. What will yours become? What will yours become? See, let me ask you this. Where are you physically located when you get your best ideas? Where are you actually physically located? How many people in the shower? Right? How about walking in nature? Or out for a drive if you can get outside of Mexico City traffic. Right? Most people around the world, of all ages, get their best ideas when they're relaxed. The shower is the #1 answer globally. Resting in bed at 4 o'clock in the morning, or waking up in the morning, or going to sleep at night as you drift off, also very, very common. I work with lots of business people. They get paid a lot of money to go to their office every day, but almost no one gets their best ideas at work. They all say, no, I get it in the shower or walking. Why? What's happening when you're in the shower or the bath that doesn't happen in the workplace, in the serious environment? You're relaxed. You get access to your intuitive mind. I was talking to a neuroscientist friend of mine about how great is your intuitive mind? How great is your potential for this kind of deep intelligence, where creativity, the real source of creativity. He said, well, your everyday mind, which is your verbal mind, which is thinking about the problems that you have and trying to solve them, he said, that's like 2 square meters here, just underneath your feet. Your intuitive mind, he said, is like 11 square miles compared to the 2 square meters. It's huge, it's vast, and geniuses are the people who tap into that on a regular basis. But what we're going to learn, and you've just learned the first principle, is how to tap into it yourself. See, here's what happens. Leonardo da Vinci, Thomas Edison, Marie Curie, they wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning with a crazy idea. Crazy. They write it down in their notebook. Average person wakes up 4 o'clock in the morning, crazy idea, they think, I'm no genius, they go back to sleep. You want to think more like a genius, you have to listen to your own intuition. You have to tune in to the 11 square miles. This is Leonardo's drawing of the embryo in the womb. It's the first accurate drawing we have. Because his curiosità was so strong, he wanted to know the very secret of life. This image here is the parachute. By the way, about 15 years ago, a British skydiver built Leonardo's parachute based on this diagram and the notes that Leonardo left, with materials that were available in Leonardo's time and place. He went 10,000 feet up in a hot air balloon. He had a modern parachute on for backup. He didn't need it because Leonardo's parachute actually worked. Who are the most curious people you know? Little children. This is your birthright of genius. We're not kidding. You come into this world. Who has a little brother or sister under age 5? They're asking questions all the time. Tell me, what about this? What about that? How about this? How about that? Geniuses maintain that same passionate curiosity. See, the problem is you go to school and then people try to be cool and they say, oh, it's not cool to be curious. So I just need to know the right answer and pretend I know everything, and that makes me cool. It's not cool if you want to be a genius. These geniuses they're passionate. They're curious. I live in Santa Fe, New Mexico. It's nice to be in old Mexico. I live in New Mexico. And Santa Fe, we have a famous think tank. It's called the Santa Fe Institute. And one of the people who started it is a gentleman named Murray Gell-Mann. Murray won the Nobel Prize in physics in 1969. Have you heard of quarks? Do you know about quarks, the smallest particle? Well, he came up with the theory of quarks. And when you look at, he has an SUV, a big car. His license plate says quarks. So Murray is 83 years old. And I was lucky enough to have him over at my house last year. I invited him as a guest for dinner. And we talked about the history of genius. And we talked, for example, about Einstein, who he knew and studied with. And we talked about Richard Feynman, who also won the Nobel Prize. And I said, well, what do you think about Richard Feynman? And he said, oh, he was smart, but not as smart as he thought he was. So we talked about Leonardo, we talked about Edison, we talked about Shakespeare, we talked about many of the great geniuses. And then when he went home, after our wonderful evening together, I just thought, I've been studying genius for my whole career and writing these books. But then I realized I just had a real genius, one of the greatest minds of the last 100 years in my house. And he lives near me, and we seem to get along. So I went to him and I said, hey, Murray, how about if I make you dinner once a month, and you come over and we'll talk about the history of genius and creativity and the essence of creativity, and we'll invite other creative people and we'll have a dialogue and I'll write a book about it. So this is my new book that I'm working on. But the point of this whole story is just to tell you, every time Murray comes over, at age 83, he's the most powerfully curious person in the room. He has that childlike passion to learn. That's why he won the Nobel Prize. And it's still, he loves nature. He studies the life of birds. And he goes around and photographs birds all over the world. Do you know there's something like 8,500 species of bird? He's seen something like 4,800 of them. And he promises to see all the rest while he's still with us. So it's this passionate curiosità. The second principle for thinking like Leonardo da Vinci is represented by this beautiful image of 3 flowers painted by Leonardo. The second principle, dimostrazione. Everybody with big gestures in Italian, all together. Dimostrazione. I need bigger gestures. Come on. Dimostrazione. Ah, fantastico. What does it mean? Demonstration would be the English translation, probably dimostrazione. Dimostrazione. It was the term that Leonardo used to emphasize the importance of thinking for yourself. He said, you must demonstrate things through your own experience. He said, yes, you learn from others, you read books, very important, but then you must think for yourself. Become an independent thinker. The word in Italian is inventore. See, at the time of Leonardo, what was the challenge to independent thinking, besides the strictures and limitations put on by the church? Information was hard to get. Books were rare. If you could find a book, what language would it be in? Latin, which you would not have learned unless you came from a noble family. Do you know that Leonardo da Vinci taught himself Latin when he was 40 years old, so he could read the classics as they became available? What's the challenge to independent thinking today? Too much information. Too much information. How do you cut through the tsunami of spam to think for yourself? Well, once again, Leonardo gives us the secret. He said, you must train yourself, when you're really trying to think about something, to look at it from at least 3 perspectives. Just like he gives us 3 views of a flower. You'll see this in all of Leonardo's work. When he sketches a face for a painting, he looks at it, he sketches the face from 3 different perspectives. When he wants to learn about anatomy, does he just read the anatomy books that become available? No, what does he do? He dissects more than 30 bodies. And he's the first we know of in history to do dissections from at least 3 different angles of entry into the body. He's talking about trying to assess his own artwork. And this is actually advice. This is advice he's giving in his notebooks to his students, which today is us. And he says, it's hard to evaluate your own painting because you're subjective. You're prejudiced. All human beings have prejudices and unconscious habits of mind. He said, so step away from your work and look at it from a distance so that it's easier to be objective. He says, then try this. Look at your work reflected in a mirror so that you may more easily imagine that it is the work of another. Then he says, sleep on it, come back the next day, ask someone you respect to critique it for you. Listen with an open mind. Only then can you say that you really thought about it. When Leonardo used to sign his name, sometimes he signed Leonardo. But you know, he had his own nickname for himself. He would sign his name, Discepolo della Sperienza, disciple of experience. And this, at this time in your life, to cultivate your own true independent thinking, to really look at things from multiple points of view. You have an opinion, you have an idea, you can't say you really thought about it until you study the opposite opinion, until you can deliver a cogent argument against your argument. Only then have you really disciplined your mind to think dimostrazione. The third principle for thinking like Leonardo, and we say this one, we want a lilting, floating gesture with this one. The third principle is sensazione. Everybody, floating gestures all together. Sensazione. Very good. What does it mean? Sensazione, I bet, yeah? It's not so hard to do Italian to Spanish, is it? Right? And to English, it's sensation. Sensation. And what Leonardo's talking about here is to sharpen your senses. He says, you need to be sharp. The opposite is dull. He trained his sensory awareness like an Olympic athlete trains their body for competition. But do you know what Leonardo da Vinci wrote in his notebooks 500 years ago? 500 years ago, Leonardo wrote that the average person looks without seeing, hears without listening, touches without feeling, breathes in without awareness of aroma or fragrance, eats without tasting, and talks without thinking. And that was 500 years ago in Tuscany, before the Kardashians. So I'm telling you, in this life is incredibly beautiful. It's filled with unbelievable joys and profound depths of beauty for you to explore and discover. But it's also can be pretty tough. So how do you have a competitive advantage in a challenging world? Sensazione. You cultivate being sharp. From now on, for the rest of your life, you pride yourself on your ability to deeply listen. The people I know who are most successful in many fields over the course of decades in their life are the best listeners. And the best listeners have humility about their ability to listen. They pay attention. They're sharper. They see what's going on. They look at you when you talk to them. They read your body language. They listen to your voice tone and your words. It's so simple. You know, you have many subjects you study in school, but probably the most important one for your success was how sharp will you be? Will you sharpen your mind or will you dull your mind? Make that choice every day when you think about the activities you engage in. What do you do today? Will it make me sharper or duller? So, again, Leonardo he teaches us all this. It's so great when you read his notebooks, when you look at his artwork with this curiosità question, what is he trying to teach us? It becomes very clear. So this is the painting by Leonardo's teacher, Verrocchio. It's called, obviously, the Baptism of Christ. You can see the central figures here were painted by Verrocchio himself. And it wasn't unusual in those days for a master like Verrocchio to say to a promising young apprentice like Leonardo, Leo, do the angel in the corner for me, touch up the background. So Leonardo did this angel. And when you go to the Uffizi Gallery in Florence to see this painting, this is part of your follow-up field trip assignment from today's class. You must go to the Uffizi and you see this. You see, this angel is so beautiful that what Vasari tells us, the first art historian, he tells us that when Verrocchio came back and saw how beautiful this angel was that his student painted, he would never touch colors again. He gave up painting. The romantic interpretation of this is he was so moved by his student's genius he just couldn't paint. The more realistic business interpretation is he said, aha,